Good morning. Where are you?
I am actually in my office at the synagogue.
Oh,
And I am here because, and that's not a Torah scroll behind me. That's actually a light.
a light?
A light,
Oh.
yes.
I thought it was a roll of toilet paper.
I thought it was paper towels.
Paper towel, rather.
I did too.
It's a light. And I came here because my wife is doing a presentation for her art group. And when she spoke with our son, Misha, yesterday, Misha said, you only have so much bandwidth at home. And if you're both on, it's possible that you won't both be getting on. So she's on the big computer, so it was upon me to get out of the house. And I came here to be on the synagogue's bandwidth rather than on which I think I'm on, rather than on my home bandwidth. And so therefore I am here in the synagogue. Now, usually, when you see in the news, it's always interesting to me what's behind the people on the news. And I often look at their bookshelves, and occasionally, I look for Jewish books that are on the bookshelf. Maybe some of you do that as well. Well, you can't. My bookshelves are really over that direction, or actually, this thing here is also a bookshelf too. So
you have no pictures on your walls.
I have. I do have pictures, and they have not been put up on this wall. And you're right; they should be put up on a wall. So let me ask you first, before we begin, how many of you have been to China? Raise your hand if you've been. Okay, a number of you have been to China, and that, in other words, you've been to Shanghai.
Yes.
You've been to Shanghai. Okay.
And to the Jewish section, and to the Jewish Museum in Shanghai.
Right, the Jewish Museum in the Jewish section.
Right, the Jewish section that they turned into a museum that used to be where the Jews lived.
There's an Israeli guy who gives a tour. He took over from someone else who used to do the tour. So let me. I have actually a couple of screen shares this morning, but we'll get to those in a second. So here's the story, right? That I hope that you followed. While Jonathan Kaufman's writing, I don't think is scintillating, it is reportage. I mean, he's a journalist, and Bruce actually has been in touch with him and suggested to me that when he wrote to Jonathan Kaufman wrote back and suggested, now I haven't done anything about it yet, but Bruce suggested that maybe we could connect with him and have a direct conversation with him. So that's great. I hope that we'll be able to do that. So our story actually begins with David Sassoon. By the way, did people know the name Sassoon before, aside from the hairdresser?
Just the hair.
Just the hair. And not related.
No,
He's
not related. Oh.
No.
Not related. So David Sassoon is born in 1792. At the age of 37, in 1829, he flees Baghdad. There's pressure on the Jews, and they've been in Baghdad for 800 years, which is pretty amazing. So, as a matter of fact, there's a little note in the text when people compare the Sassoons to the Rothschilds and say they are the Rothschilds of the East. The Sassoons evidently take offense and say that the Rothschilds are newcomers, while they are, they've been around for a lot longer. They were, the family was the Nasi of the community. The Nasi, in a sense, was the appointed leader of the community, that when the political authority wanted to deal with Jews, they had an address. They had, and they were traders, and they were wealthy already in Baghdad. They were successful. So this is not a family that comes from rags to riches. this is already a very, very successful family, and a family that dealt in trade. He flees. He goes to this community called Bushar that's controlled by Iran. I'm not exactly sure where Bushar is. And there, he really begins from nothing. Eventually, he stays there for a short while. He goes to Bombay. He's a politically very savvy guy. And he supported the British. He becomes an Anglophile. Though he remains certainly very Jewish, he won't take on the trappings, the clothes. I love that little note that he says that he translated "God Save the Queen" into Judeo-Arabic. Were people familiar with Judeo-Arabic?
Yeah.
I mean, Judeo-Arabic is Maimonides wrote in Judeo-Arabic,
Yep.
as well as in Hebrew. So these languages, we English speakers in the English-speaking world, we're a weird phenomenon. Wherever Jews were, they invented their own language. Are people familiar with that? And their own language, Yiddish is just the most recent phenomenon that's similar to Ladino, that's similar to Judeo-Persian, that's similar to Judeo-Arabic, and they all have something in common, which is that they would write the local language in Hebrew letters, that 70% of the language was the local language, whether it was German or Spanish or Arabic or Persian. But there was still 30% that was Hebrew, usually religious. So God Save the Queen in Judeo-Arabic. I think that's it gives you an idea of his. And he has now 8 sons. David. The oldest is named Abdullah. The next one is named Elias, and those are the 2 that become very important for this story. David is a very trade savvy guy. He's learned from his father to learn a number of languages, to learn a trade, to learn. Oh, my light went out here.
Could be.
That's going to happen several times. I may forget about it. He invested in steamships, which was new. He bought dock space and was dealt with different things, and he would invest in the newest technology. So they grew cotton, but the cotton was filled with rocks or whatever. I hope you can still see me, even so the light went out. It goes on. And he invested in cotton gins. I don't know if it was Eli Whitney's cotton gins, but to clean the cotton. Founded the Bank of Bombay to finance a new railway. He exported cotton to Europe during what happened during the Civil War here in the United States is, cotton was king, except that the North stopped buying Southern cotton. And so Europe could not get American cotton. And he sent cotton. I'm sorry about this on and off light. He sent cotton from India. Open schools. Now I'm going to go to. Let me see. I want to go to. Shoot. Here. I'm going to go to screen share because I want to show you something. So, whoops, that's not what I wanted to show you. Well, this is one of the things I wanted to show you. There are actually 2. I don't know why this one came up. Can you see that?
Nope.
Nope, just you
Damn.
and Elaine right now.
Not a thing.
Aha,
Uh,
now we can.
Okay.
Okay.
So before I really knew about the Sassoons, this was when we were in Bombay. I took this picture. You can see the bottom. The bottom is ceiling lights donated by Eugene Schildkraut of Great Neck, New York, in memory of his father and mother, et cetera, et cetera. But now look at the top one, and maybe if I can bring this, if I can bring it down, can I lower it? I'm sure I can. The question is, how do I know how to do that? Let me lower it, and then I will try and even make it bigger. Now, can you read that? It says this is the gate of the Lord, right? Can you see that? This stone was set as a monument to bear a sign that this house is called the House of Prayer, erected at the sole expense of David Sassoon, Esquire, completed 5621, 1861. So this is proof that David Sassoon, Esquire, was there and built the first synagogue. Now, let me show you. Let me see if I can. Can I? Let me get rid of that. And let me go to one other, see if I can do one other thing. And that is this here. Okay. And do you see that or you don't? You just see, I have to. Okay, let me, where are all of you? Did I lose you? I may have lost you.
we're here.
We're here
You're here.
in the gallery.
You're there, and I'm gonna do one other thing here and do a screen share. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the EEE Sassoon High School. That's still, I don't know what EEE stands for, but still exists right next to the synagogue in Bombay. There are still about 5,000 Jews in Bombay that are of two different groups. One are the original Baghdadi Jews. They have largely left. And then there are the Bnei Israel, who have their synagogues, and they number most of that 5,000 in Bombay. So this is in Bombay, and to my understanding, there are hardly any Jews in this school anymore. But why was this school created? It was created because David Sassoon wanted to train Jewish expats from Baghdad to work in his business. It's very interesting, right? I think it's very interesting. Let me stop the screen share. We're back. Okay, that's the extent of my. So that's what he did. He opened schools to train employees. He built synagogues. He built a hospital. And he became, in Bombay, one of the richest men in India. So the focus of our author then turns to China, and he talks about the whole issue of kowtowing. And people are aware of where the whole tradition, what kowtowing was. Yeah, kowtowing was bowing all the way to the ground, and the arrogant British refused. The emperor rebuffs British efforts to engage in trade. What did the emperor say? We're not interested in anything you have to sell. But the British were interested. What did the British want?
Money. Opioids and money.
They wanted silk. The British wanted spices.
Tea.
They wanted porcelain. They wanted tea. Much of the tea came from India, but the silk and the porcelain was, the only thing that the British had to pay for these things was paying in silver. So this was an uneven trade, and therefore the British needed something to offer the Chinese, whether they wanted it or not. That thing was opium. So opium, the purpose, opium, just like opioids, has good purposes. Opium treats pain, it calms anxiety, and the only down aspect is it is addictive. But the opium was grown in India, and for many, many years was smuggled into China. As you were reading this, did you have, and I think he makes reference, the author makes reference to the comparison of our opioid crisis here in the United States with the opium crisis in China. Do you remember what the numbers were? If I'm not mistaken, we have a 3% addiction rate in the United States. In China, they had a 10% addiction rate. The addiction was as terrible as our opioid problem here in the United States. And the Jewish and the Sacklers, who are really at the center of all of this, is a new movie. What's it called? The Crime of the Century, I think it's called. And it's a new movie primarily about the Sacklers. So the British finally sent the military in 1839, right? This is 10 years after David fled Baghdad. The British sent their military, and we have the first Opium War, which ends up with a treaty 3 years later, the Treaty of Nanjing. And after the first Opium War, what resulted? Hong Kong was transferred to the British, and 5 cities were opened to Western trade, one of them being Shanghai. There were to be no taxes, and these 5 cities were not subject to Chinese law. So the British takeover of Hong Kong lasted until
1990.
Recently.
Yeah,
1999.
was it 1999?
I think so.
Okay, my how time flies. We all remember when that transfer happened.
What were the other 4?
Well, one was Canton, which is Guangzhou. and three other cities. I'm not sure. He doesn't talk about it. But if you travel in China and you go to Guangzhou, which is the old, there is an area. It looks like an island, just off of Guangzhou. It's got European buildings on it. And I really didn't understand how it was used, but similar to Shanghai. But one of the things that the Chinese love to do is before weddings, 3 or 4 weeks before weddings, bride and groom get dressed up in their wedding clothes, and they go to some well-known place for photographs. So you can go to this place, this island, and we saw it in several other places as well. And you've got all kinds of people all dressed up, and you have several weddings with photographers.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite fun. It was especially fun for my wife, who took pictures of the photographers taking pictures of the brides and grooms. Where do they go? They go to this island off of Canton or Guangzhou. So after the first Opium War, opium remains technically illegal, but the Chinese are powerless to enforce the illegality. It's from the first Opium War that the Chinese still today, especially today, talk about the 100 years of humiliation. So we're talking 1842. That issue of the 100 years of Chinese humiliation by the West is still a centerpiece of Chinese international relations. When they talk about dealing with the United States, when they talk about the efforts to limit China in any way, in the same way that we Jews talk about the Holocaust, and we do, that the Chinese refer constantly to these 100 years of humiliation. And it really was 100 years of humiliation. The Sassoons engage in opium trade, but they're really small potatoes. They're too small to compete, but they really become Anglophiles. They become British citizens. They champion the British in the Indian Revolt. And Abdullah, the oldest son, becomes
Alfred.
Albert. Right? He now takes on a new name. He's now Albert. It was strange to me that a Jew would have the name Abdullah at all. But that was the name that David gave his oldest son. Now we get to the story of Shanghai. Foreigners. I have this sense that there was a wall, a defensive wall off the coast, and shops were inside. Outside this wall was wilderness, were brambles and so it was a no man's land outside the walls, and that's where the Chinese, the authorities in Shanghai allowed foreigners to settle, really outside the city. 7 years later, Elias, second oldest son, arrives. He's the second of 8 brothers. And what were some of the rules? The rules were You must marry Jewish women from Baghdad. You must attend synagogue. But the wives and children, even if you're sent overseas, the wives and the children remain in Bombay. Abdullah, Elias is sent out. He's described as shy. He goes, his first stop is Canton, which is Guangzhou. His second stop is Hong Kong. And then he decides to go to Shanghai. By the way, have any of you read sort of the story of the Rothschilds? The Rothschild family begins in Frankfurt in a ghetto. Father is a trader of various sorts. He also has many sons, and he sends his sons to various communities. Sends one to France. James goes to France. He sends the other son to England. He sends one to Italy. So the story here of these two families, on some level, is very, very similar, because also the Rothschilds had very strong. You didn't have to marry a wife from a particular town, but you had to marry somehow. You had to marry within the extended family. And that continued among the Rothschilds for a number of generations. Trudy, yeah.
Why did he want the families to stay back? I mean, Elias was gone years.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was.
It didn't make sense to me, but
yeah, I don't have the sense that David was a lovey-dovey father. David was all business, and he trained his children to be all business, and somehow keeping the wives and the children in was an aspect of control.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Priscilla.
Yeah, there was also in Prague, going back several hundred years, Prague being the physical center of Europe. They had a law there that while there were many Jewish families that had many sons and daughters, only the oldest son was allowed to stay in Prague, that the other sons were sent out throughout Europe and intermarried with other Jewish families. And they would send and establish businesses and whatnot, and would send the latest inventions, the latest ideas, culturally, manufacturing, and so on, back to their families in Prague. So that Prague not only was the most progressive city in Europe, it was because of the Jews who were spread out in England and France and Germany and so on. And they intermixed with the Rothschilds as well. So there's some names that weave back and forth, but it was one of the smarter things in a way that the government in Prague managed to develop that city's importance in Europe. But because the Jews were sent out, they couldn't stay there. They were sent out and established themselves in other places and traded information back and forth.
So trade and money lending, I think, are not so dissimilar. I think they're very much connected. And yeah. Jews were really in control of trade. Why? Not only did they send their sons to all these different cities, they could communicate in all kinds of different languages. They could communicate in the local language. And they all these families invested in communication systems so that they got communications somehow faster than, I'm not sure that they sent homing pigeons, but they somehow, and this was the clue in many ways to Jewish success. The main opium dealer was a British company called Jordan Matheson. Elias saw something in Hong Kong that he then later on copies in Shanghai, and that is he sees this signaling system that somehow off of Hong Kong, this company would would signal to the ships filled with opium to remain offshore until the signal came in to come in, and they would monitor the price of opium. And when opium became scarce and the price went up, that's when they would bring the ships in. So it was something that evidently Elias observed, and he uses it later. So he goes to Shanghai. Shanghai is colder than Hong Kong. It's a better market for woolen yarn and textiles, because they're not trading just opium. They're whatever they can sell, they sell. So that area outside the walls was now cleaned up. He now builds offices. He builds warehouses. He builds homes. There's a British club. There's a race course outside the walls. There are now European-style streets on something that they call the Bund. Now, it's interesting, when I was in China and I asked, directions for the Bund, no one had any idea, because in China, it's not called the Bund. Or that was my impression. It's not called the Bund, but it's the street that runs right along the coast. So, what did you say, Bruce?
No, just the water.
Yeah.
Waterfront.
The river.
This is where the Jews set up. Now, I assumed the Bund was a German word. He claims that it's an Urdu word from India, I would guess. But they built warehouses, and they sold opium, Indian spices, and Indian wool, and they bought silk, tea, animal hides, and they became brokers in Shanghai. It seems that they were always interested in efficiencies. So they helped form the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. Elias now sees that Abdullah, his older brother, who is the heir apparent, is not working hard. He's not working like he is. So he now develops a rivalry with his older brother, who's living a life of luxury. David then dies, I think, at the age of 72, and Abdullah becomes chairman of the Sassoon company, and Elias decides to resign, and he creates his own company, E.D. Sassoon and Company. It seems later on that they cooperate, but he resigns from the company. 1857. So the first Opium War was 1839. So 18 years later, there's the second Opium War. And at the end of which, the sale of opium becomes now, rather than illegal, becomes legal. And the Sassoons soon create a monopoly. They buy the opium in India directly from the farmers. They ship it by commercial steamer or their own boats. They hired Chinese to distribute, and they outwitted this bigger company, Jordan Matheson, who eventually go out of business because they lock up all the contracts. And what do? They use the lookouts to sell when the price is high. This is what Elias learned earlier on. They always invest in the newest things. They invested in steamships. Now they invested in the telegraph, revolutionary communications. For distribution, they use a Chinese minority that I never heard of before, the Chaozhou, and they become their main distributors of the and they become the kings of opium sale now that it's legal, and they never ever concerned themselves with issues of addiction. Anybody have any feelings about what this family is doing? I could condemn them. I could defend them. Any feelings about they are addicting an entire society?
Were they, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Were they in denial?
Were they in denial? I don't think they were in denial.
No,
I don't think they paid any attention. They made a sale when they could make a sale.
Yeah.
Actually, they weren't actually distributing the stuff. They had somebody else, some other people distributing the stuff, and the more they could sell, the better.
Was there as much concern at that time about the effects of addiction? Were people aware of what it could do and what it could cause people to become and so on? I mean,
They did.
did they see the problem?
They made sure that none of their people took opium. I think they knew what was
they knew.
what was going on, and it was a pain medicine. It
But-
really, the comparison to our opioid is it's very interesting to compare the two.
But
Susan?
We didn't have opium.
it was used in the United States as laudanum, and it was in very common use. So yeah, they knew. But then again, we have to recognize that we're looking at it from our point of view now, and not the point of view then. I mean, they were in business to make money, period.
And the Chinese were not the Chinese were doing everything to see to it that they were not, to limit the integration of these people. And remember, they're refugees. They're now very successful refugees, but they've
They're
fled.
refugees.
Question.
Yeah, Ron?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Why did China, I mean, originally there was laws against opium, right?
Yep.
And then why did they get rid of those laws?
They
Yeah.
didn't.
Because the British defeated them.
Oh,
The British defeated them in the first Opium War. They then defeated them again in the second Opium War. In the second Opium War, after the first Opium War, it remained illegal, but it still was coming in.
Mhm.
Second Opium War, it became a flood. As a matter of fact, there was an anti-opium league that tried to draw attention to this problem. San Francisco passed the first American anti-drug laws. And if you have your book, I'm going to look just at the bottom of page 41. Bottom of page 41.
it's in the hall, back hall.
So here you see
Arnold?
testifying before the commission. This is the Royal Opium Commission in India in 1893. Testifying before the commission, representatives of the Sassoons insisted that if used in moderation, opium was safe. Does this sound familiar? It was a mere entertainment activity for the upper classes one Sassoon executive declared, while another added that if taken moderately, opium was very beneficial. Just as Europeans indulged in drinking alcohol, so the Chinese were instinctively drawn to opium. Indeed, the Chinese who smoked or imbibed opium were better behaved, quieter, and far more sensible than those addicted to alcoholic drinks, the Sassoons declared. Isn't that outrageous? But didn't weren't the same things said about opioids? Hal?
Well, I was going to say that these are very similar arguments that the Percocet industry used when they detailed Percocet to physicians, and talking about the safety of the drug and how effective it was. I mean, it's one could look at the history of the Sackler family and Percocet and come up with exactly the same conclusions.
I can. 3 years ago, I had my surgery, my heart surgery. At the end of the heart surgery, the doctor gave me a prescription for 90. What is the Oxycontin, right? 90 of them. I went and talked to him and I said, first of all, I never filled the prescription. Somebody told me I could sell the prescription for a lot of money. I never filled the prescription. I said to him, why would you give me a prescription for 90 pills? He said, well, some people need that much. I said, how about 10? How about 5? It was 90. So that's that. I think that's, so you can imagine if this is what's happening in this country with opioids, a problem which we still haven't dealt with, what was going on with opium, we were addicting an entire society. So what did we had, Hal?
It wasn't, I think it's very clear that at some point, the Sacklers were very much aware of the negative points and addictiveness of what they were marketing. It wasn't clear to me, at least not from the reading, what the Sassoon family knew about what they were marketing. It was obviously banned in most places, and the non-Chinese simply did not use it. But it'd be interesting to understand exactly what their understanding was of the medicinal aspects of their product. And that doesn't become clear in what we've read so far.
Yeah, I can't get past the idea that one of the central pieces here is clear racism. These were yellow people, and weak, and they were an unbelievable market. Now, would they have sold the same things in Europe if they could? I don't know, but they were doing it. They were doing it in China. So, members of the family were sent to England to defend opium. Several of the brothers entertained the British upper classes. They wined and they dined them. In particular, they became very close to the son of Queen Victoria, who was Edward, Prince of Wales, also known as Bertie.
Birdie.
Who else was interested in wining and dining Bertie? The Rothschilds were interested in wining and dining. So both these families, they had money, and they wanted to use it at a time when a lot of these upper classes were hurting for money, and they gave him money. They even encouraged him to invest in opium.
England?
For Bertie to invest in the marketing of opium. And he talks about the fact that this gave rise, I don't know that it needed that much encouragement, to a great deal of anti-Semitism. If you read the introduction, and I think the introduction is really, really wonderful, where they ask a man from China what he thought of the Sassoons, and he said, "Oh, we hated them." And then he said, "Did you hate them because they were Jews?" And he said, he looked evidently sort of peculiar at them. He says, "No, we hated them because they were British imperialists."
Right.
So the fact that they were Jewish was somehow not that important to the Chinese. It was important to the British. In 1891, Parliament voted to end opium trade. What did the Sassoons do? They prolonged implementation. It never was implemented. In 1906, 1891, now 15 years later, 1906, they Parliament passed another law, but the sale of opium continued. 1909 was a conference in Shanghai, and three years later, now we're talking 1912. Finally, there is an international agreement to ban opium. So all this time till 1912, they sell opium, and of course, what this undermines the Sassoons market. But after all, what are the Sassoons claiming? It was legal, it was taxed, and it was their own people, the Chinese, who distributed it. So on some level, they felt no responsibility.
Move these bookcases. Should
Right.
they or not?
So you have these three aspects. It was legal,
Where are they coming?
the British taxed it,
Yeah, I guess so.
and they
Both of them?
Get behind it.
and they distributed it. So now at the end of chapter 2, what happens to the Sassoons? They engage now in real estate, in factories. They say at the very end of chapter 2 that the Chinese communists did an evaluation of what the opium trade, largely to this family. The opium brought that family the equivalent of what would today be $2.7 billion is what they did in opium. And we'll read about all their other investments, which brought their holdings in Shanghai to $5.6 billion. Now, I think the Rothschilds actually were richer.
Yeah, they were.
But those numbers are in today's dollars. But 2.7 billion on trading drugs, and they would, they took from China the things that the British wanted, is pretty amazing. Any thoughts about the beginning of the book?
I have a question. When there were opium dens in China, right? But
Yep.
what it looked like from everything I've ever studied, it was just men at these opium dens. And when it spread out to England, was there such a thing as opium dens there?
I'm not sure that the addiction ever went to England. England
Oh.
somehow became concerned about what they were doing to the Chinese, because it, became obvious that this was a real problem. But this is
Women
how-
weren't part of this?
what's that?
Women weren't part of this, just men?
Couldn't tell you. I don't know. Anybody have any idea whether women were?
Well, they did talk about the wife of one of the, I forget who it was. I think it might be a little later. One of the wives got addicted to opium and was using opium. I think in San Francisco, I mean, we had opium here in Portland, opium dens. If you do the Underground Railroad tour and you talk about the Chinese that came over to build the railroad, or those that were shanghaied and taken out to work the sea in the boats, opium was part of that too. Kind of like when you have prostitution and you drug women and get them addicted in order to be prostitutes. A lot of times the workers were using opium or drugged, in order to do stuff that the whatever, to be exploited. I guess it's a way of exploiting a workforce. And so it was done in Oregon, it was done in San Francisco. That's why they passed the laws. So I don't know about the women. I imagine that prostitutes were part of opium. I've seen it in movies, but I don't know if that's Hollywood doing it or if it's a reflection of what really happened and that women also partook in opium.
I think that the Chinese, as we, were basically pretty sexist societies. Women were engaged in business. Men went out to the world. Women were expected to stay home. I would imagine that relatively. I don't have any evidence, but I would imagine that few women had to deal with the problems with the men who came home addicted. I think, by the way, that's still common in Japan and China. Men go out to have a good time, and women largely stay home. But those kinds of things were universal. So this is the first family, and now the second family actually started by working. The Kadoris actually started by working for the Sassoons, and I think we're going to see that in the next section.
What do you want us to read next week?
I think it's to the next chapter 3 and 4.
3 and 4. Okay.
Let me see. It will take us from. I schedule about 50 pages a week. Yeah. So chapter 3 and 4 will take us to page 107.
Okay.
All right. Has anybody read this book before?
Yeah, somebody.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, a couple of you have read it before. I think it's a whole interesting chapter about these are Jewish co-religionists who we as I think I wrote before, we largely have a Eurocentric understanding of Jewish history. Well, there's a tremendous amount that went on in terms of Jewish scholarship in North Africa. You have all these generations. Baghdad was an unbelievable Jewish community. So this is simply insight into another powerful family.
Is that family still powerful?
No.
The Sassoons, no. The
no,
Kaduris,
Kaduris,
yes.
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 It's interesting. There are Kaduri neighborhoods in Hong Kong. I think they still are in charge of the light and
Yes.
the power company.
They are.
So it's interesting that the Sassoon family sort of disintegrated. I don't know if they're probably still quite wealthy. And you ask about the Rothschilds, and the Rothschilds also don't have the kind of power that they used to have, but they're still around. They still have a bank.
Are the
Rabbi?
Kaduris still Jewish in Hong Kong, or have they assimilated?
I think they're still Jewish. I think so.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I find it somewhat fascinating after reading the book that they never learned the language.
Yeah, yeah.
They never learned Chinese.
Nope.
Never did.
Right. And David somehow never learned English, though he became an Anglophile, but he made sure that his children learned English. But I think that that's very emblematic, they were going to remain aloof from that society. I think that's a very important issue, that they did not engage in learning Chinese, which somehow one would imagine over 100 years they would have. Priscilla?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when Joel Gray directed Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish, the song "If I Were a Rich Man" came out "If I Were a Rothschild."
Yeah.
That was the word
in Hebrew too.
that was the word for it.
In Hebrew,
That's how it
Lu
came
Hayiti
out.
Rothschild.
Yeah.
That's how it came out in the Hebrew production that I saw in 1964.
Yeah.
I wish I had the libretto in Hebrew, because there were so many good phrases. I saw the Hebrew production before I even heard the English production.
Well, when I do teach Hebrew reading, one of the things that comes up are certain words that easy words to read, and so I always talk about I guess it's the Sound of Music, where it's Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Ha'erev, which is not what's the English?
Oh, you mean My Fair Lady?
Barad Yarad Bidrom Sfarad Ha'erev. Right.
That's My Fair Lady.
My Fair Lady, right? And it's the rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain.
Yes.
Right. But in Hebrew, in order to make it rhyme, it's
Barad Yarad.
hail falls in southern Spain tonight. Which is, you got to be creative when you're going to translate, and you want to do songs. You can't do an exact translation. So yes, it's Lu Hayiti Rothschild.
When Elias broke away from the family, did he bring his family finally to China?
Yes.
Does it tell us? I don't remember.
Yes, it tells us, and it happens way down the road.
Oh, I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Later on, he does.
I haven't read that part.
Okay.
But that's a real. The author here tells us it's a real hardship.
Oh, yeah.
So, Bruce, how do I contact Jonathan Kaufman? Do you have an address?
Yeah, what I did was go to Northeastern University, and then you can look up Jonathan Kaufman. If you have difficulty, please let me know, and I'll research it.
Okay, if you have an address.
I will send you an address.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And I'll see whether he will join us. So everyone, see you next week.
All right.
10:30.
30.
Just a reminder, Shavuot, Monday and
right.
Tuesday. Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, there's a program at the synagogue where you can do a 15-minute drive through of all 5 books of the Torah out on the parking lot. You need to register for it so that people will know how many are coming. Services will be Monday and Tuesday from the synagogue with clergy. There's no morning minyan on its own. And Yisker is on Tuesday. So you're encouraged to attend in person if you register or online. So have a happy holiday and lots of good cheesecake.
Monday and Tuesday, you can come.
You can
In
come
person.
live, up to 25 people, but you have to register ahead of time. And that's on the synagogue website. You can do that. And or you can follow the service on live stream as you would a Shabbos service. But just so you know, services are now allowing 25 people in Friday night, Saturday morning, and for Shavuot, Monday and Tuesday.
Great. So Chag Sameach to everyone.
Well, Rabbi,
Yeah.
before you hang up, what is the tradition of eating dairy foods on Shavuot?
I think there are several explanations for why dairy foods, and all of them are weak. But in preparation for the revelation, the people did not eat meat. Is certainly one of the many explanations, but it's not as clear as our diet for Pesach. But yes, there is a tradition. So people eat blintzes. What are traditional foods in Israel on Shavuot?
Blintzes.
Just,
Is it blintzes too?
Blintzes, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Kreplach,
Kreplach?
dairy. So,
Kreplach has meat in it.
but no, you can also make a dairy kreplach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or vegetarian. One of the traditions, I think, was doing dairy meals because they were easier to prepare. And it meant it was easier for women to also take part in in watching the night and participating in Shavuot.
So here's a question. Did the Kaduris and the Sassoons have cheesecake in Shavuot?
No, the question is, did they have Shavuot to start with?
I think what's interesting is that in both of these families, I'm talking about the Sassoons and the Rothschilds, their connection to Judaism was very, very important. I don't know whether the Sassoons built the synagogue in Shanghai, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Well, the book talks about them being kosher. I mean, keeping their kosher laws.
Yeah, how do you do that?
They
Is
do that in China.
when you come to Shanghai? In India, it's very easy actually, because Hindus are largely vegetarians. Even so, when I came to we came to a town which is one of the Hindu holy cities. I'm going to talk about it tonight, as a matter of fact. There was a Chabad, and I talked to first of all, he didn't want to let me in because I wasn't Israeli. The police outside only let Israelis in. I forced my way in, talked to the woman inside, who was the wife of the rabbi, and I said, it's wonderful here in India. It's so easy to eat. Well, she doesn't eat that food. Even so, it's entirely vegetarian. They are, they have vegetarian and then they have strict vegetarian. I'm not even sure. I don't remember what the difference is. But in this town, they didn't even eat eggs.
What vegetarian?
But they
It's vegan.
Probably don't have too many McDonald's.
It's different than vegan. But the Chabad, I don't know where they got their food from, but they wouldn't eat in Hindu restaurants, which I found crazy because I did.
It's interesting contrasting the Rothschilds with the Sassoons, that the Rothschilds, as I remember reading about them, the men in Rothschild, most of them married non-Jews.
Not for the first few generations.
Yeah, but it sounds like the Sassoons did not marry out.
Well, I don't know for how many generations that happens, but for the Rothschilds, for the first several generations, they really not only married Jews, they married cousins.
Yeah.
They married within the extended family. Today, the Rothschilds, today many of the Rothschilds are not married to Jews. All right, everyone.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Chag
See you next week.
Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Bye-bye.
You know?